Welcome to the SSI Executive Conversations podcast. Today's episode is a continuation of our conversation with Dr. Elliot Street. Today's episode focuses on the importance of building a culture and how it is the foundation for any successful business, and how to hire for that culture, looking at transferable skills, philosophy, and building teams.
And with that, we go into our next question and start to look a little bit more about aspects of talent and how important it is to building a company. I talked about earlier, the reasons companies succeed or fail, and it's consistent across all industries, and certainly leadership, mission, vision, company alignment or misalignment, and the right talent or the wrong talent. It's remarkable when you look at whether it's clinical trials, failures, regulatory submissions that are not approved initially, FDA warning letters. The vast majority of the reasons come back to cutting corners, misinterpretation of protocols, creating too much complexity. It comes back to people. And so mission and vision, we kind of already, obviously your mission came right off the tip of the tongue. So we've already talked about this a little bit, but that leads to misalignment, which leads to wasted resources. So obviously we've talked about mission, but maybe talk about vision, employee value proposition. And I'd love to have your perspective there as you've been growing and building your culture.
Yeah, thanks, Don. And I mentioned it, I can answer every question with our mission statement. So that mission statement is really carefully crafted, right? Our mission is to become the world's partner for surgical training. We then have to be able to explain what that means. And when we explain what that means, as I did earlier, that allows everyone to draw off that depending on what part of the business they're in. We're incredibly vertically integrated. So we have hardware engineers, we have software engineers, we have our own manufacturing facility. We've built a factory in the UK. So we have all the ops there. That's all sorts of processes from injection molding through to production level 3D printing. You've got soft tissue manufacturing. We then have commercial teams, so marketing, sales, finance, you name it, everything sits under this one roof. And every single person's touch point with that mission is ever so slightly different. They all view it. So when you talk about vision, they all view that in a slightly different way. So that can be a problem, right? So all of a sudden you could have people interpreting that mission and how they play into it differently if you then don't keep the vision. And I know some people will have a vision statement or a purpose statement, but I want to talk a little bit more granularly about vision, if that's okay. So
absolutely,
we always remind people about, right, that's the mission, that's what it means, but what does it mean for you? Understanding what in people's minds it means for them. And actually it's fine for people to have different interpretations of what that means for them, in our opinion, as long as they're all acting in the same way. Now, that doesn't mean we want a load of robots. It's very important to have diversity in thought. And that's the most important part of diversity, we think.
You never want an echo chamber.
Absolutely not. And so this is how we drive the vision for the business. And that is by having really clearly defined core values, external and internal. So our external core values, I touched on them earlier: make technology that's more affordable, more accessible, more functional than that came before it. We'll park that. The bit that for us is super powerful, that's very important, but the bit that's super powerful for us when it comes to attracting talent and motivating them and keeping them are the internal core values. So what we look for, and we're very clear on this, is we look for people that have great attitude, great excellence, and great ethic. And if it's all right, I'll just touch on what those mean, because if you don't understand what those then mean and what we're looking for, it doesn't help you sort of keep working towards the North Star. So attitude is, it's very subtle. There's multifactorial here, but the starting piece is, and the way we describe it is, we want people to interact with Innovus, and every person they interact with, and go away and go, I really love that brand and I love that product, and I look forward to engaging with them. That's the best way to describe what a great attitude is. Now that can permeate through every little piece. Like nothing's too much of a problem. Like, do the senior leadership need to get on the factory floor at some point of time just to help out because we're incredibly busy? Like all of those things are permeate through attitude. Excellence for us is all about just holding yourself to the highest possible standard that you can. If you shoot for 150% of excellence, in our opinion, and the way I describe this is preparing for an examination. if you've revised and prepared so heavily for an exam that if you have a great day and they put 100 questions in front of you, you could get all 100 right. And then they put another 100 in front of you, get all 100 right again, and so on and so forth. That's if you prepared that well. If you have a bad day, which everyone does, you'll revert to 80%, and that's still going to be way above the mean. So
Yes.
that's what we ask people to do for excellence, which is have you engaged as fully as you possibly can to the highest standard that you can at that moment in time? Because if you have, and an error happens, which they always do, it's not going to be catastrophic. And then the final one is ethic, and this is three-legged stool. This is probably the thickest and most important one. That's work ethic, right? You could be a lovely human being that people love and actually prepare really well and actually be really quite good at what you do. But if you only do it for 1 hour a day and you don't consistently turn up over and over again, it's not gonna help a business that's on such a grandiose mission. Like, it's just not going to work. So and there's a final little piece in that in ethic, which act ethically as well, which comes full circle back around to attitude. So when you think about mission and vision, the mission should be pretty easy to understand and pretty easy to articulate. Everyone will then articulate how that means for them differently, depending on where they are in our organization. But everyone's vision should be the same as long as I'm deploying these 3 core values in my day-to-day, then I know I'm going to be on track.
That's brilliant. I mean, that is brilliant. And I love how succinctly and how you describe each aspect of it. And in terms of, interview process, I talked about, customization of the interview process. You have to delineate between cultural fit and the technical skill. If somebody is a 12 out of 10, but they're not coachable, they're the smartest person in the room, they don't get along well with others, you should not hire them. If they are, in contrast, everybody invite them to the Christmas party and to the cookout and everybody loves them, but they don't have the minimal technical skill for at least that position, you should not hire them. And so I've seen so many scenarios where companies do not have a consistent process for capturing, comparing, and contrasting whatever the technical skill is. Forget about delineating between culture. And so in terms of that process, you spoke about values. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to identify the values that you want. If you're a cutthroat law firm, the values that you want are going to be different than if you're a nonprofit charity or you're, a med tech company. And so you got to define what those are, and how you set up your interview process and you evaluate the cultural piece has to be different in terms of how you do that. And you just did a great job of explaining that, because to your point, 80%'s a heck of a lot better than 50%. And you want people that are striving for 100%, but we're all human. None of us are perfect. And that is why cultural fit is so vitally important, because when you have those off days, and you're going to have, obviously, 50% of startups don't make it a year. Half of those aren't around year 5, 80% don't make it 10 years. Business is hard. Being an entrepreneur is hard. Growing, just being in business is hard. Scaling is an even greater challenge. So having people whose personal why matches what you're trying to do, so that when you do have tough days, they engage in, and it's still going to be a high score. You're going to have higher employee engagement. People are going to pull together, and you're going to have less wasted resources.
Absolutely. Can I pick up a couple of points there? Because I think that's super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I got a little excited there. Sorry. Not sorry.
Great hosting, driving great discussion. I absolutely love it. So a couple of points there, which I think, so first of all is around the process, and then the other piece is around when those people have those off days, how do we react? So that process piece, you're absolutely spot on. We have I specifically, but so is Jordan, my co-founder, and then we've instilled this in everyone in the business. We are incredibly process systems orientated. Love a process, love a structure. So our interview process, to your point, is so clearly delineated that in the first interview, we literally only talk about capabilities. And it's a really strange thing for people, because they come in thinking, I want to talk about me and personally. We really care about we care about those things deeply, but they actually come in the second part, because we just made it so very clear that in this part, we need to come away with a very clear answer in our minds. Objectively, can this person do this role? And if it's a yes or no, it's yes, these persons are in the yes bucket. Who looks like they can do that best? And then we worry about those other bits later on. Now, Is that right or wrong? I don't know. It seems to have worked for us so far, but it allows us to be very clear around that technical piece and then the rest of it. So first of all, totally agree with you. And I think having a clear process is really important. It's very funny when people engage in it, because I always start the interview to say, I'm not going to ask you any questions about your resume or you personally. Can't wait to hear about them later on, but do not be startled as the fact that I haven't asked you. I have read all of this information. We're just going to focus here, because focus is key. The other piece is what you're mentioning there around this idea of people have off days. Like scaling, like starting is hard. Yes. Scaling is really hard, and then scaling for the long term is just it's a brutal activity,
and it's completely different skill set. The things that got you to make it initially, I mean, unfortunately, I've made many mistakes, but the things that get you initially to be successful and make it past 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and then you go into to attempt to scale, those same things that helped you make it, if you don't adapt and change, you won't make it.
100%. And it comes back to that piece we were talking about, where as that happens, if you set that standard of hold yourselves to the highest possible standard, but you have to be very clear, that doesn't mean you're not allowed to make mistakes. The higher the standard you hold yourself to, the fewer the mistakes, right? If you're just making lots and lots of silly mistakes, you need to look inwardly and go, I need to think about this a little bit more. But it then becomes beholden on the leadership team to not only say that's what we expect, but then to do right by the team. And this is difficult, right? When the leadership team are looking to push forward, and it can become stressful and tiring, but do right by the team such that when they do make that mistake, you go all the way back to your own core values, and you hold, as a leadership team, you hold yourself to your own core values. So if someone has made a mistake, reaming them out for a mistake is not a good attitude. And it's not particularly good excellence, because that's not being a good leader. So it's funny that you mentioned that piece where people can make mistakes, they will make mistakes, they almost have to make mistakes. You want that to happen. Yes. But then it becomes beholden on the leadership team to give them permission to keep doing that within like effectively a zone of acceptance for those mistakes. And that's tough. And I think that's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people, and it takes time to develop that. And sometimes you don't often have that time if you're scaling really, really rapidly. So yeah, I think I'm glad you picked that up, because it's not when talent comes into a business, yeah, it's important that they do the work, but it's a leadership's responsibility to set the tone and then lead everything back to their core values or their vision or their mission or whatever it may well be that's keeping everyone focused.
If you think about operational excellence, regulatory strategy, vitally important. How your clinical strategy ties into that, obviously vitally important. Quality has to be a part of your culture. If it's not, the fines, the risk management aspect, how it's going to come back and bite you. But if you, to me, true operational excellence, it's all about best practices, and you have to bring in the right people. We've already talked about that, so that you'll be more efficient. But if you have true operational excellence, then people actually are, not excited to share mistakes per se, but they're going to share, hey, this is what happened, and people come together so that you can learn from that and take those data points. And, if you're not focused on outcomes and analytics in the age of the metaverse, right, it's vitally important. And there are companies that are going to fail because of not making a focus there. But you create an environment where people are not afraid. If they're afraid to make mistakes, then how do you have best practices?
Yeah.
Because you're not looking at data in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to giving systems, process, framework, and giving people an understanding of, okay, what is acceptable and not acceptable? Because repeated mistakes of the same description, that does, for us anyway, this is why we have it as a core value, isn't excellence, because you haven't learnt from the error. That doesn't mean you're not allowed to make them. Jordan and I say it all the time, like we got here to where we are by making loads of mistakes, like really quite quickly, and also trying to learn from other people's mistakes and ask as many people as many silly questions as we can, right? So it's really, really important. But as you rightly say, you've got to be looking at the data of how that's translating into, well, have I learned from that? How have we adjusted, etc. So yeah, I mean, we could start talking about the power of data and building a business and be here for all day. But
I wanted to touch base on what you talked about your interview process, and maybe when we're together next in person, we can, over a beverage, talk a little bit more about your process. But I think in terms of how you focus on the skill first is really smart. How we help companies customize that, it's peppered throughout the process, and then different people are responsible for the key questions relevant to values. And there's certainly additional data points that can be collected around that, but how you ask the questions is really important, so it's not leading. You want people to be in their most natural state. Interviewing, is like being in front of your parents, in front of the principal.
yeah,
On a first date, everybody's trying to put their best foot forward. So even how you score them and you look at answers, because different people can have perspectives. You got to create a process in how you score that takes out bias. But if you're going to interview and do it the way that you're doing it, and without getting into compare and contrast, we don't have time for that. But I think that's really, really smart, because if you did the culture and you really, really like them, and then you invest the time to go into the skills and they don't have the skills, it makes more sense to make sure that in terms of that process, that you're making sure that they have the talent first before you invest the additional to find out whether they fit the culture, I think.
you're spot on. And herein lies, going back to our core values. So think about the interviewee, whether or not that's me or any of the hiring managers in our business. True excellence for the hiring manager is this is a bilateral process in which the hiring manager ultimately should even be even more engaged than the candidate. That's how we view this, because it's the hiring manager's responsibility to get the best out of that candidate. That's how we view it. Mm-hmm. So what do I mean by that? You've already touched on it there. Although all of the questions in our first phase of our interview process are around capabilities, by the end of it, if you, as the hiring manager, if you've actively listened and you've asked the questions in the right way, you will actually come out of that knowing this person has got the right attitude, the right excellence, the right ethic, because it's more of storytelling. It's not closed question after closed question after closed question. It's big open questions that let them run. And by the end of an answer, where you've sat there and you've listened actively, they've told you that they've got the capability. Here is an example of me doing X. Mm-hmm. Right, I'm going to do a quick question, maybe a quick closed one to check whether or not you're BSing me, or actually I'm going to drill down into that. Great. I'm going to open up an open question again, let you carry on. By the end of those open questions, they will have told you whether or not they've got a good attitude, good excellence, good ethic for us. This is just for our process, right? So, right. And so that is culture fit, but it's the culture fit. They haven't realized they've answered those questions. They just think they're telling you about, I can do this job. So as much as it sounds like we're very binary, and we're like, because the argument could be, and I'm sure there's some people sitting here listening, and I would agree with them, but Elliot, like, you'd shortlist down to maybe 3 candidates. You're going to fly them into your offices for an interview, or have them drive in the UK to an interview, and you don't know if they're going to be a good culture fit. That's a disaster waiting to happen. Totally agree. Although it's capabilities focused, really, really actively listening and asking the right questions means that you can do both at the same time, but with a focus to hang that around. So, but fine, it's just to close that piece out, it comes back to transferable skills, right? Very lucky to have spent 6 years at medical school being taught how to ask questions and then receive information and distill that back down and actually actively listen. And I'm always working on that personally. I'm always encouraging the guys to work on that personally, because it's really hard. It's exhausting. It's really tiring when you do it properly.
Hiring is not easy. If you do it transactionally, you get transactional results. So many companies struggle, and so many companies, again, we talk about why companies fail and succeed. There's train wreck after train wreck, example after example. It's not easy to do, and there's only so many resources. And that's really where Top Talent Accelerant came from. My goal was always to change the candidate experience to the benefit of the companies. I think most companies, and personally, 12 years in corporate America, I was not good at interviewing people at all when I first started. And I got to a point, I was like, okay, that's your best. Like, that's not good. This has to change. Nobody typically you don't get training. Maybe you get a manual, some questions. Everybody's busy. If you're the hiring manager and you have an open position, you're the one picking up the slack. Now you have to add interviews onto your calendar. Human nature does not add to the efficiency of the process. I always thought as a candidate, when I had opportunities, it wasn't, for the most part, a very good process. Candidates oftentimes are not respected. They're not communicated with efficiently. People are afraid of being sued. So, oh, sorry, we're moving forward with candidates that more fit what we're looking for. What are you talking about? Like, I had everything what happened? I thought the interview went well. And so many people don't really even get trained on how to better interview, other than, okay, I've got to prepare these canned statements, star format, different things. So my goal was always to change the candidate experience to the benefit of the companies. And that's where TTK, I didn't know how to do that the first 4 or 5 years, other than be respectful, do what I say I'm going to do, and be transparent and work hard. But that's why we have a process that includes, matching up personality profiling. It includes video technology. So in terms of the culture, so you get a better picture of whether or not they're going to fit, and you avoid interviewing people that you shouldn't interview. And candidates avoid going places that aren't a match for them, because if you get those things right, then you're going to have more likelihood of success.
It's that piece that you just mentioned there. I think I touched on it. It's a bilateral process.
Yes.
It's not a unilateral process. And actually, in my opinion, it's weighted the other side of the fence. It's more important that we make sure that the candidate feels and knows that this is the right fit for them to have a successful outcome, and the business to have a successful outcome. Again, in the first phase of our interview, we say that there are 2 outcomes for today. The first one is we're just going to check, do you have the skill sets to do this role? More importantly, by the end of this conversation, we need to have given you enough information about this business and this role so that you know that this is the right place for you for the next stage of your career. So I could not agree with that statement anymore. And yeah, I think that is just such an important part of the interview process that we're thinking from a candidate-centric point of view.
Well, you have created a process that certainly it's all about, when I present on talent management strategies, attraction, efficiency, retention. So you can't focus retention first. You have to be able to attract, you have to be able to vet, and then it's all about efficiency of process, because too oftentimes companies interview people that they really shouldn't, or they take too long in the process, and then they get, hey, let's go offer this person. They're already gone. So you just wasted all this time to find the people. Then you add in opportunity cost, the cost of mishires. Jack Welch used to say they are more than what corporate taxes are. So anywhere from 5 to 15, depending on the position, 5 to 15 times the annual salary. So, but it's not easy, but you're creating a process. Everything that you talk about, as I think about it, you're talking about it, you're respecting the candidates, you're not making it transactional. You're putting a lot of effort into them and to understand that. And so I believe you're creating a scenario where you're bringing on people based on that are going to be excited about the product. And then if they're being invested in annual employee appreciation programs, career ladders, and they are excited about what's going to happen, right? The 100, even when there's an 80 instead of 100, you're headed in the right direction. So bravo.
No, thank you. And yeah, look, we always got stuff to learn. Like you won't see a single novel behind me on this bookshelf. They are just books and books and books about what information can I absorb from experts that have been there before us. And again, that comes back to that excellence piece and being hungry for saying, we haven't got that right. How can we tweak that? Yeah. We're going through a process right now. And I was like, oh, I've added another little element into that process off the back of one piece of feedback. I was like, oh, that was interesting. I didn't communicate very well about this particular part of this role. And so I think, yeah, it's...
Well, I'm coming up on year 9 in June, and I'd never owned a business before, never been in recruitment before. And I've learned more in the last year and a half, 2 years, I think, than I did the first 5. And so you always have to be learning and growing and being open to being wrong,
Yeah.
because we learn more from our failures than our successes. We got to get moving here time wise. So we talked about, I definitely want to try to get a couple of these things in here before we finish up here. So communication is paramount. We've talked about that multiple times. You have to be able to understand where other people are coming from. So you had an interesting experience example with the S bar, and I'd love for you to share that with the audience that we talked about previously.
Yeah, I think that comms piece is, again, it's like it's down to the hiring managers, but being really engaged and being active when you're doing a hiring process. Same thing with communication. Like, don't be lazy with how you communicate. Be proactive with how you communicate. So again, the S bar is a model for handing things over. Traditionally for patients, but you can use it in any environment. You can use it in a written environment. You can use it in a verbal environment. And again, the power of that. We've only integrated into the business very recently. But bearing in mind, we're running the business for 12 years, and I've been using it for 12 years as a physician.
Right.
And I only recently have I thought, you know what? I need to integrate that. And I'll give you the example as to what drove that. So similar situation to today, but sort of comes into the office. And actually, on a comms piece, I'll share this as well.
Okay.
We have a comms protocol in the office as well, which tells people whether or not they are actually allowed to integrate and engage with someone. We use Bellman profiling in the business when we bring people in. If someone is a completer finisher, they don't like being interrupted when they're doing work. And so we built a protocol so that people could be uninterrupted while they're working. And it's effectively a traffic light system. And so that's one piece of comms. Traffic light system, can I go and engage? Okay, you've got the green light to come in and engage. Come in, word salad. And I'm sitting there going, I can't help you. Help me help you. It's not possible because I don't know what's being asked of me here. And it was that moment where I was thinking about communications frameworks and protocols and thought, Elliot, you pillock, you know about the best protocol for this. You've known about it for years. Why have you not brought it into the business? Here's an important thing, especially as businesses are scaling. I think if you add frameworks and things like that too early, there is a point where you can add them too early because the critical mass of individuals who are behaving in that way isn't strong enough such that if you go from like 10 people to 50 people, 40 people in that business, let's say they came in a year, are not used to that. And so they're diluting the 10 that are using that framework. So it was, again, I thought I reflected on this myself and said, why didn't you bring this in earlier? And then I was like, maybe naturally, and I patted myself on the back and said, don't worry, you did well here. Naturally, I thought if we had brought this in earlier, bearing in mind, we went from effectively 40 to 80 people last year in the business. So
as you talk about this, I'm thinking about the vital few. You always have to have the vital few. And I've certainly made the mistake of having too many projects, and then you do too many things mediocre and you don't do the vital few.
100%. Focus is key, right? And as you scale like that, that's like message 101, and being disciplined, that's important. But we thought about that with the comms protocols and SBAR, and this goes for the same with anyone thinking about, oh, that sounds like a cool trick, I'm going to Google that and implement that. You've got to get the timing right, because timing is everything as well. And so I think if we'd integrated that into the business a year ago, we would have integrated it, and then we'd have to reintegrate it because it would have got diluted, and we wouldn't have had enough champions of the protocol to keep holding people's feet to the fire on it. So yeah, I'll let you know in a year how we're getting on when we're like 200 people and and everyone's just using word salad and no one knows what's going on.
I love it. So let's finish up with, you've done a great job, obviously, with transferable skills and hiring for culture. And what do you look at there? I think so many companies miss out on talent because they want to check off all these boxes for a position. Especially, I think it's vitally important as companies grow and ABC funding, mid caps that are growing for sure. How's the position going to change in the next 6 to 24 months? And if you're just looking at certain skills or experiences and you're not looking at transferable skills, annual voluntary turnover is 25% every year across all industries. Quarter of the talent walks out. It's usually not the people that you want to walk out. So I think understanding, again, hiring for culture and that they buy into the mission, and then they have the ability to grow not just vertically, but also horizontally or vertically within the organization, depending on the organization needs and their desires. So let's finish up by talking a little bit about that. And I know you do psychometric profiling as well. You mentioned, Belvin. So let's finish up on that note.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting and really important, especially for the, as you say, those A, B, C mid-market businesses, even the mid-market companies. There is not often a really clearly defined career pathway like these big strategics. You go in the big strategic and you can really see where you're going. Now, swings and roundabouts, right? In the big strategics, often there are blockers because there's lots of people that are on that ladder ahead of you, and you sort of sometimes have to wait for them to come through. Often in the smaller businesses, there's no one on the ladder other than the founders and the execs, and there's a lot of positions, but it's not obvious always what those positions are because they haven't declared themselves yet. So we're very mindful of communicating that transparently with the team, and I think that's probably the really important bit about retaining those. To your point, the people that walk out the door, often very talented people that may become a bit disenfranchised, a bit disillusioned with what I'm hearing is not marrying up with what I'm seeing. And that can happen even with the best intent. So if you don't communicate, in our opinion, if you don't communicate that, guys, this is a very fluid vehicle. We actually don't know what all of these roles will be. You could end up in 1, 2, 3 of them, but it could be next year, it could be next week, it could be in 3 years' time. We've tried to take that broader approach to saying, here are the opportunities ahead of you, not you're going to go into that opportunity in 1 year time. Because if you're that binary with it, the really good people will go, well, you told me that I'll be there in 1 year's time. And that's just irresponsible, right? So I think if you think about that landscape, I think that's really important. I think that's certainly how we look at it. And that's, again, very difficult. It takes a lot of time and energy to do it, but we think it's really important. I think that we're coming out the back of some, especially in our sector, in the medtech sector, a lot of layoffs, right? So there's a lot of people out there in the marketplace. I think for the hiring managers and those that are still lucky enough to be raising capital and growing, not being complacent and just switching off a process and not being an engaged hiring manager, because again, those people, if you get good people just because there's a plethora of them in the talent pool, you then have to think about keeping them, and that's going to be really important. And again, comes down to the final piece, as you mentioned, we use Belbin profiling. It's a behavior profiles. What behaviors do these people like to engage in? 9 different behavioral profiles, and generally speaking, we use them on the way in to understand, could this be a good fit for this person in the role? Going back to communication, Belbin is a common language in our business, and we use it as a communication tool. So, for example, I will have my light on and my earphones in because I'm quite high on complete to finish it if I'm working on something, because I don't want to be disturbed. People know that, but I also know the completer finishers. I see someone doing the same, I'll leave them alone. Same with someone that's super creative in a plant. If they seem like they're just running around like a headless chicken, they're probably about to spit out the next great thing. So let them carry on. Like, don't tell them to go and sit down and play with widgets one after the other, because you're not going to get the best out of them. So again, that comes back to that retention piece. And look, we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot still to learn, but these are just our views on things.
Well, meeting you in Europe and getting to see your presentation, I mean, the benefit and the value to the healthcare system, to the ecosystem, patient populations. I mean, I always look at, does it improve patient outcomes, patient access, or does it bring efficiency to the healthcare system? And it's going to do all of those in a way that is vitally needed. As you know, we have obviously surgeons, respiratory nursing. There's a lot of areas where we don't have enough talent to take care of people. And so anything that creates efficiency and that can improve outcomes is vitally important. And then the first thing in meeting you, like your energy, who you are as a leader, comes out immediately. And so I really appreciate your time, your kindness, and coming on. I'm excited to see how the company grows and the value it's going to bring. And I have no doubt that you're going to look back down the road at what your goals were relative to your mission, and it's going to be pretty exciting. So I hope to. Are you going to be in Dana Point?
Potentially,
Okay.
potentially, but focus is key, and there's a lot of things, very, very exciting things going on that are meaning we're having to focus on it. So if I miss it, I'll hopefully be there again next year.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you sharing the incredible things that you're doing there, and great conversation. So I appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate you. Thanks so much for having me on, Darwin. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the SSI Executive Conversations podcast. For more information on Innovus Medical and Elliot, make sure to check out the links below. And make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and find us on the web at SchurigSolutions.com.